morning, everyone. Here we are in Ocean Geographic Live again, 11 a.m., exactly on the dot. And here I'm in Sydney, Australia. Olaf, how do you pronounce the last name? Meynecke?
Well, it's more like Heineken. Like
Heineken. All right, I like that. Thank you for being with us this morning. And Alex Rose in Chicago.
Hello.
Again, that is good evening down there.
Yes.
And Olaf is in the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, right?
Gold Coast.
And
it's sunny out there today, so it could be the sunny Gold Coast.
Sunny Gold Coast. Okay. And Olaf is specialized in whales and whales research, and he was supposed to have organized this year the Eco Summit in this year. Unfortunately, it's being postponed. So we look forward to next year. And look like Olaf will be joining us in our Antarctic, Elysium Antarctic in 2022.
All right.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a cool to have him with us. They're doing some whale research and in that expedition. Okay, cool. Alex, off you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael. Thanks so much for having me. This is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to that expedition, actually. And if I start, my presentation, you guys will also understand that I do have developed a strong desire to go out on the ocean, and I've been running a couple of expeditions in the past. So
before you go, Alex got to introduce you.
I have to do an obligatory bio reading. It's very exciting.
Okay, that sounds exciting.
You don't want to miss out. I had to piece things together from LinkedIn and all kinds of craziness. So yeah, just get ready. Right. So, folks, here's the background. Olaf received his PhD in marine biology from Griffith University in 2008 while studying the relationship between fish harvest and environmental drivers. During his research, he developed advanced short and long-term tagging methods for fish. After completion of his PhD, he became a research fellow with the Australian Rivers Institute and later the Griffith Centre for Coastal Management. He's now managing an international research project on the impacts of climate change on whales. Olaf is CEO and co-founder of Humpbacks and High Rises, Inc., which is a not-for-profit research organization dedicated to urban marine mammal research and protection. With more than 30 peer-reviewed publications and numerous appearances on TV and radio, his passion for science communication is well documented throughout local and international media. Okay, fine, now you can start.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I didn't want to miss that one, did I? So...
No, you really don't. It's my best part of the day,
Can I go now?
You can go now.
Okay, let's just share my screen, see how that works. So, how does that look?
That looks like it should be right in a moment. Yeah. Good.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Okay, so I put a couple of slides together also to orientate myself and make sure that I'm not just going off track, which is sometimes quite easy when you talk about the ocean because it's so big. So I'm quite excited to actually share some of the stories that have brought me very close to the marine environment in the last couple of years. I must also say maybe decades. I am getting older. But there has not very much a clear path to the ocean at all. In fact, I grew up in a very landlocked place, in a very beautiful part of Germany, surrounded by forest. And one of my many passions was to look after animals. And one of them was a baby deer. So raising that was probably one of the most exciting things that I did as a child. And it brought me very close to nature. So we did have a lot of farm animals and the usual pets. But my poor mom, she was always quite freaked out when I came around with one of the many pets books that we had. And I started getting very obsessed with one of the pets that I really wanted to have, and it would go on for weeks and weeks until either my mom would give up or I was finally convinced that it was not possible to have a tiger or Yeah, so there wasn't, I mean, growing up in a landlocked place, you just don't think about the ocean really. But I did think about the environment. And it was very clear for me that I always wanted to do some work or something that would change or help the environment. Simply because I grew up so connected to the environment, and so many of my real close friends were actually pets and animals. So how did I get there? How did I get to the ocean in the end? And now actually, I feel this is the place where I always wanted to be and where I feel most comfortable. And it wasn't like I was one of those many kids that always wanted to be a marine biologist and they always wanted to play with dolphins and catch sharks. I was not really going that way. So I did my studies in environmental sciences actually in Germany, and I did have some interesting experiences in fields that were quite far away from the marine environment. So I did work for the European Union for a little while, and I also actually did a few jobs in big companies like in the headquarters of Mercedes and in one of the headquarters of the largest distribution companies in the world. So I was trying to do something in environmental management, but that actually wasn't really where I was feeling very comfortable at all. And there was, through all this study time that I did in Germany, obviously always the dream of exploring the world and going somewhere. And just after I finished high school, of course, what I did was go as far as possible, and I went to Australia. And I think that was where it all sort of began to link me and get me hooked up with the ocean. So I I met all these amazing people here in Australia, and they usually live on the coastline. In fact, it's about 80% of the population lives within 50 kilometers of the coastline in Australia. So the ocean actually rules the life of the majority of most people in Australia, whether they know it or not. It determines the weather. It determines, what they do on the weekend. It determines where they go for holidays, and sometimes it determines what they eat. So when I was up in North Queensland, and I ended up meeting some very nice people there who took me to their places, and we ended up going out to the reef, and we went fishing. And little did I know that one day I would actually be researching mud crabs. I mean, I didn't even know what a mud crab was. I was fascinated by the size of these things, and of course by the taste. Um, and that experience actually, it never left my mind. It never left this excitement of being in a new world, but also feeling very home and like meeting people that are very, very welcoming. And that was something I just could not forget. So when I went back to Germany and I continued my studies, and as you know, studies can go on for years, and they did go on for years. I did finish my degree eventually, and all I wanted to do is come back to Australia. Of course, I sort of embedded some elements in my degree that actually forced me to go back to Australia, such as finishing my thesis on an Australian topic. So I was in Townsville at JCU for almost 8 months to finish up a thesis topic, and then of course, I when I was in Germany, I just wanted to come back to Australia, and I just wanted to live that life that I found there. And one of the best ways to do it was to get a PhD, because at the time that was probably the best chance I had to at least get a scholarship, have some sort of financial backup, and then also and also help me to learn more, because some of the work that I've been doing in Germany during my studies, but then also just after I finished, it was very it was very computer based, and it was very much just doing what other people were telling me to do. And I mean, one thing that I really, and still to the day, desire to do is learning new things and exploring the world. And during my PhD, I started working on fish. And I mean, in all irony, the only reason why I actually ended up working on fish in the coastal environment is because my original project proposal was on mangroves. And when I looked at Australia, I realized it has a lot of mangroves. And I was wondering what happens to mangroves when we've got sea level rise and when climate change will actually alter the coastline. And that brought me to the coastal environment and of course also into the water, because I needed to understand, what is using the mangroves. And one of the most, some of the important fishing industries rely actually on the fish that lives in the mangroves. So I did some very detailed research on fish catch data and related it back to the distribution of mangroves and other coastal habitats, and with the idea of basically creating an index and an information template that would allow managers to understand, the importance of certain coastal habitats. So if I've got a combination of seagrass and mangroves, how is that enhancing, certain fish species, and then, results in higher catch rate. So it was actually, I at the time I thought it was going to be a very useful PhD, but I think that's what most PhD students think while they're doing it. And I mean, the crisis sort of appeared about 2 years into the PhD when I realized that all I was doing was actually extracting data, managing databases, trying to figure out how, database systems or so not to crash, and how to actually deal with these issues that large data sets bring. And I wanted to just get out in the field. There was this really urgent desire that that wasn't the plan that I originally had when I was sitting in Germany, dreaming of my, new home in Australia and exploring the world and learning all about it and learning about the coastal marine environment. And then I ended up sitting just inside, trapped, and working on huge amount of data sets. So I ended up, pushing for projects and trying to find funding. And obviously, little did I know how hard it is to get funding, but I did get some really good funding. And this is why I pull up finally this slide here and start talking about bull sharks. So we did end up getting some funding to tag a couple of bull sharks. And well, most people might not know, but the bull shark, in particular juveniles, spend most of their time actually in estuarine and coastal environments. In fact, they're very, very close to the mangroves. So these guys need to escape their mom, or others, they're also sharks that tend to feed on them. And the best way of protection is to be in sheltered waters where larger sharks are less likely to occur. So they also have the amazing ability to basically deal with salt and fresh water. So for a bull shark, water is water. Though that does have some, they can't just switch from salt to fresh water in an instant. They need to adapt to it over some time, and it does take energy, but they can live in quite, different kind of marine and freshwater environments. So we really wanted to know where these sharks actually go when they're in these shallow waters. Like, where do they spend most of their time? And we were quite fascinated by, using something that is, a new technology, something that's not invasive, and something that might actually give us a bit of an insight on the animal's behavior. So Criticam at the time was the state-of-the-art technology or video camera system that was allowing measurements of temperature and salinity and depths, and we would get directions, and of course we would get video. We kind of knew that filming in 1 meter viz wasn't going to give us the most exciting footage, but we did get some really interesting results. And of course that was super exciting to be out there in the middle of the night and then catching the bull sharks and trying to put this camera on. It was it was one of the reasons why I'd actually really ended up liking my PhD, because it led me to projects like this. And little did I know, when I was feeding my deer back in the days when I was 10 years old, that one day, I was going to attach some cameras onto a bull shark. So we did get a couple of tracks, and of course it wasn't as easy as it was planned to be. We struggled to get the number of bull sharks, and the camera system itself back in the days was pretty bulky, and it wasn't like something that was, easy to attach. They come off, and by now the technology actually has evolved so much more. So we got a couple of tracks, and what we actually found out is, which is not that surprising, is that they do really like the deeper parts of the channel. So they will spend the majority of their time in those deep sections, and this is of course where they probably feel the safest as well. So, which in some way is also good to know. I mean, if you are keen to swim in a canal on the Gold Coast, I would probably avoid the deep sections and just hang out in the shallow bits. It doesn't mean that the bull sharks are not going in those shallow areas. They probably will to hunt for fish, but the majority of time they actually are in those deeper sections. And of course, these are juveniles, so happy to actually go in the water with them anytime, as long as they can see you. It's all about visibility, because the bull sharks are obviously quite adapted to those murky environments. They're not ambush predators. They're not seeking out some fancy prey that tries to run away, but they will go for anything that seems suitable and might be an easy catch. And so the whole issue of bull sharks here in our coastal environment, in particular in the canals, is more of a perception, because they are all juveniles, and the chances of actually being involved in an incident with them is relatively small. And that kind of like working with these animals, of course, it made me think, well, can I swim with them somewhere? Can I actually be in the water with the bull shark and be in the water with an adult bull shark? I mean, we work with the small ones, and we do have a bit of an aggregation site just outside, the seaway, which is sort of the entrance to the open ocean. And there is an aggregation site where those juveniles hang out. And one of our really passionate underwater photographer, he's captured a couple of amazing videos. I mean, they're quite anxious of divers, and they don't like the bubbles because the bubbles make a lot of noise, and so that kind of scares the sharks. I mean, let's be honest, sharks are actually scared of a lot of things, and it's its size does matter. So if there's a larger shark in the area, they will just leave very quickly. So as long as you're the same size or a little bit bigger than the shark, they will probably be scared of you, because you could be a potential danger to them. It's a pretty rough world out there in the ocean, and of course, for sharks in particular, because they have gone through millions of years of evolution, but they basically stayed quite the same in terms of their instincts and survival. But then the more it is interesting that you can actually go in the water with these potentially dangerous sharks, and you can actually swim with them, well, dive with them. And so this was in Fiji, and that was the first time I actually was in the water with one of these large creatures. And it was just so fascinating to see how they were swimming around us, and obviously they're not paying much attention to us at all, and they were fully trained to take the bait of those the guides who were actually leading the trip. And so they were only allowed to get bait when they were swimming clockwise. And so they were totally trained to swim in the correct direction to get the bait, which is fascinating, because if you think about, this is a creature that has never really had much interaction with humans throughout their lifetime, and of course throughout evolutionary times, and yet there is an ability to quite quickly adapt to environments and changes in the environment. And so that was so fascinating. And of course I wanted to go back in the ocean and learn more about sharks. And so I ended up doing another few trips. But of course, there is another issue that, we have here in Australia where sharks are being absolutely feared. And it appeared to me so bizarre that, only a few thousand kilometers away, there is this industry about, diving with sharks and bull sharks. And then here in Australia, there's just the opposite. There is actually fear, and there is a whole government-funded operation to kill these animals since 60 years and target them to actually kill them. And it just appeared to me absolutely, it made no sense to me. So if they are so dangerous as they say, so why is it possible to go in the water with them and swim with them? So it has to do with the conditions, of course, and it has to do, where these encounters are happening and in what way. So it is completely predictable. There is obviously, a lot of science and information out there, but that doesn't get through to the public. And I was trying to get, at least some crazy ideas out here. And I was saying, well, why don't we just introduce shark diving on the Gold Coast? We've got baby bull sharks. We could actually create we already have an aggregation site. All we would need to do is create an artificial dive site further out at sea. It would actually then drag out those animals that are closer to shore, and they would probably find shelter there. And we could actually get an industry going that would dive with these animals. And, of course I was, called the crazy one, and it went a bit viral in the local media, as I expected, and it did label me a little bit, of course, but I did not mind that much. I really wanted to get that message out there, that swimming with these animals is actually a possibility. It's just the way how we deal with it, and we don't need to kill them. And in the back of my mind, I was like, well, if we would set up an industry that has diving with sharks, then surely it would make no sense if we would kill them only a few kilometers away. But the battle unfortunately continues, and so we still haven't made much progress. There has been a court case that ruled against the killing of sharks in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, which kind of makes sense because it's a marine park, and it's actually against the whole point of a marine park to kill marine life. So it might start some change for the next coming years, and there has a bit of a change in public perception, but the fear of shark has never really changed, and it's something that it's sort of intrinsic to humans, being in the water, feeling helpless, and then you're sort of meeting a predator who is obviously living that environment and a lot more adapted and definitely be able to swim faster. So that fear will never leave, but fear can be overcome by knowledge and by understanding. And I think that's why it's so important that we do the science and that we do work on these animals to find out where they move, what they do. So my next trip then actually led me again to Fiji. And there was then a new diving operation set up to dive with tiger sharks. And I think that was, apart from the visibility, it was probably one of my most exciting encounters with these large animals. And I only have actually been with a tiger shark that was partially alive, hanging on a drum line. And it was probably a female, about 3.5 meters or so big, and she, she was still partially alive, but it was just very, very sad to see the animal dying there, and then having the urge to see the animals live, and then going in the water with them. It was fantastic. It was just, I do not really support the feeding as such, but if the alternative is that the animals are being hunted and killed, then the feeding is a much better option for them. I'm pretty sure if they would have the choice between getting food or being killed, they would always vote for getting the food. So, these operations of feeding them obviously has an impact just because of, getting those animals closer for longer periods of time, which naturally doesn't really happen. But seeing them circling us, and they were absolutely not afraid. They were just very interested, and they're very different behavior to the bull sharks. The bull sharks had no interest in the people that were just around and watching them, whereas the tiger sharks really started to look at the people, trying to suss them out. And I noticed that they actually they knew the guides. They knew not just that they had the food, but they actually started to bump into them, and it was a much closer interaction that, you know, fascinated me. Of course, these animals are like, you know, one of them was like 4.5 meters, so it's massive. But you can just see that is a very different shark with a very different behavior. And they are mostly scavengers anyway, so, you know, they are not necessarily the fast hunters. So they suss out their prey a lot more in detail. Not that they were going, hopefully, to suss us out as potential prey. But it was a wonderful interaction. And I would definitely like to do something like this again, maybe at a different place. And you know, I would prefer that there would be no feeding, to be honest. And there are aggregation sites around the world where, you know, it's not necessary that these animals are brought in through feeding. So that would be something, you know, for the future. And when I went to South Africa, of course, there was another shark dive up, and that was with Mako Sharks, and that was without feeding. I mean, there was you know, some burley, but there was no food actually provided to the animals, so no bait, which I think is a lot better. It means that they obviously not staying around for as long, and they move on, you know, after about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But yeah, being in the water with those Mako sharks, like the fastest shark on this planet, and, you know, again, a complete different behavior. Like, they're very, very fast moving. They were sussing us out quickly, coming back again, and also didn't really have you know, much. There was not much distance between us and the shark. I mean, we're talking about 0.5 meter at times, but everything was very fast. The animals are moving super fast, of course. Most fascinating are the colorations, like diving down there, and everything was sort of more greenish because it was an upwelling area or a mixing zone between two currents, and so there was a lot of nutrients in the water, so it wasn't really beautiful, crystal clear. And, you know, and you just spend some time down there. I'm thinking, well, is there going to be a shark coming here or not? And then suddenly there's this amazing, you know, fluorescent blue and the silver coming through that green water. And it just does something to you. And everyone who was with us, of course, you know, we came back up to the surface, and there's like this sheer, you know, happiness and just the release of the excitement that we finally got to see, you know, one of the fastest predators on this planet and the fastest shark. It was just special. And, you know, I mean, I cannot stop in the back of my mind to think like, wow, wait, we're actually killing Mako sharks. Like, you know, here I am, you know, admiring this one single shark so much, and at the same time there's probably a few, you know, thousands and thousands of these animals are being caught, and we actually consume them. So, you know, that is something I think that diving and being in the water with these animals, like, people have experienced that. They see the ocean in a different way. That it's not just food out there, you know, it's actually something that we share a space with, and that, you know, is so different to what we see on land. But there are also just animals like us, and, you know, we can share the same space if we decide to put our head under the water. The blue sharks weren't far, and they are definitely the puppies of the sea. So that was in the same area in South Africa, just of Cape Town. And the blue sharks sort of came first, actually, before the Makos came, because as soon as the Mako sharks are coming, the blue sharks are out. And the blue sharks are the cutest sharks I've ever seen. They are so curious, and they're just bumping into the divers. And I remember before we went in, they were saying, oh, if the little blue sharks are coming, you know, make sure that you push them away, because if you don't keep pushing them away, they will start nibbling on you. I was like, he's joking, right? I mean, what shark actually comes that close? And they did. They literally did come, and we need to push them away. So it was, that was just fascinating. And they're obviously very cute. They're only about 1.5 meters or so, and they're very slim. Two of them had actually hooks in their mouths, and we're trying to get those hooks out, but they were just so stuck. And it's all from the long line fishery. So, I mean, we went probably 30 nautical miles offshore. Like, we drove for over 2.5 hours, and you would think you're in the middle of nowhere, but there was no impact of humans. But you go in the water, and there you are. You see these animals with long line hooks in them, and it's like there is no place on this planet anymore where we can really escape human impact. Like, it is everywhere. But on the same side, of course, we can share this message that there's these amazing, beautiful animals out there, and we need to protect them. Back to our local place. So just here on the Gold Coast, we do have sharks. We actually do get bull sharks, of course, as I mentioned earlier, and we do have tiger sharks coming through, but it's not really possible to swim with them here. I mean, they are usually quite transient when they come through, so the chances are relatively small. And we also don't have always the clear water that I would prefer. But we do have a number of really beautiful local sharks, and I made it my passion now to actually go out here and spend time, with some of our local sharks, so such as these leopard sharks or zebra sharks. They are a beautiful shark to dive with, and all divers love them because they usually spend some time on the ground resting, and then you can sneak up from the side and you get this really nice photo, and they have a beautiful pattern. And we have these animals right at our shoreline. Like, literally, I can swim out about 300-400 meters and go down for a free dive, and I can spend time with these leopard sharks, and that's just it's so wonderful. Most people have no idea. So they live here, they live on the beach, they live on the shoreline, and they actually don't know what is in the ocean just a couple of meters away from them. And that also includes shark nets that we have put out here on the Gold Coast that capture these beautiful animals that I so like to swim with and dive with. And this was an encounter a couple of years back when it was still allowed to actually go closer than 20 meters to the nets, which is now not allowed anymore. Simply for reasons like that, because people could take photos that would actually reveal the impact that these nets have on the marine environment. And seeing, these animals stuck in the net was probably one of the most traumatic and saddest times for me, because I was helpless. We were not able to help them. We're not supposed to interfere with the net, so we have to let them in there and suffocate. So, and that happens, that happens every day on this coastline, and I get really frustrated about it. But it's part of, it's part of the whole battle to protect our own marine environment better. I tried a lot to push against these shark nets and try to make a difference, but we were still in that stage where they are being accepted by the tourism industry and the government as a method to reduce interactions between swimmers and sharks, which scientifically there is actually no proof for that. So as a scientist, of course, I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that these entanglements, at least of protected marine mammals like dolphins and whales, and they are actually very protected in Australian waters. In fact, it is highly illegal to interfere with a marine mammal in Australian waters. Yet they are getting caught in these nets on a predictable basis. So we looked at the entanglement rates over 20, 30 years to find out if there was, a particular environmental condition that would actually allow us to predict when the entanglements are happening. And in fact, we did find something. We found that the closer the East Australian current was coming towards the shoreline, this is the warm water current, the more of the humpback whales would come closer to shore, and the more likely they were going to be caught. we also found that when the conditions were particularly calm, and of course during the southern migration, when the whales were having mothers, or when the whales were having babies that were coming close to shore, resting, and during that resting time, they usually get then entangled in those nets because they're literally just drifting around on the surface trying to get some rest. And so, over the last couple of years, we've been pretty good in predicting these events. And I guess always my argument was, if it's a predictable event, then it is no longer an accident. And we cannot just use that as an excuse. So if it's predictable, we wouldn't need to act on it. And that's something that we are continue to push for. And of course, there's hope, there's change coming. And well, while talking about the whales, that was my other passion, of course. And while I've been working with sharks, and of course I love sharks a lot, I mean, one thing that sharks do not have is a very, very unpredictable behavior. While people tend to believe that sharks are unpredictable, but they are actually very predictable. So, we can go out there, we know when they go to a certain area for food, and they will show up in that time. Whales are quite different story. And so I like the challenges. And one of the big challenges I found myself in was, how can I study whales, and I ended up setting up an organization which called Humpbacks and Hydrizers, and we wanted to focus, on the marine environment, the whales, but mostly also bringing a message to the people that we need to protect our local marine environment more. And that was a rough start. It's not like, you set up an NGO and you just get run over by people and everyone wants to give you money and funding to get things started. But, now 10 years later, I can say it was worth the journey, and I really enjoyed spending time with amazing people and also having an impact on, on our local community, making people aware of our whales that we have in our bay and study them in much more detail. And one of the studies that I was doing, and that was something that actually took so long to develop, it took years. I remember in 2010, I was talking to a colleague who was using remote controlled helicopters, but they were actually fuel powered. They were huge, they were loud, noisy, and they were very expensive. And so there was a contact to a Hollywood filmmaker who made drones for the film industry. And I contacted him, and he's like, well, I can make you a drone, maybe, the cheapest for like $5,000 or $6,000 US. And I was like, I can't even fly a drone. It's probably going to drop in the ocean. And then like $5,000 are gone. I can't do that. And he's like, well, if you wait a year longer, there is this company, they're like the first, they're going to actually produce drones for the normal market, for the public, and they're going to be a lot cheaper. You'd be able to pick one up maybe for $1,500. And so, it was true. And I was getting my permits ready, and it's very hard to get permits in that time because no one ever flew drones over whales. It was a complete new thing. There was only one other group in the US who started in the same year as I did. And then I finally got my permits together, and I had my Phantom one. Oh gosh, it was a temperamental drone, that Phantom one, and taking it out onto the ocean was a whole new level of excitement. I mean, I did not have funding to buy another drone, so dropping it in the ocean was never an option. And we did get actually covered by the news,
are being used to
which was
capture
great.
DNA from the blowholes of migrating humpback whales. Researchers are trying to find out whether the increasing whale
So can you hear that?
is placing pressure on the species.
Almost 20,000 humpbacks leave Antarctica's waters annually and migrate up the east coast. Little is known about the mammals, so a Gold Coast researcher launched a pilot study to examine the animals' health. Using a drone, Dr Jan-Olaf Meynecke collects mucus in a petri dish hovering above the humpback's blowhole. Whales breathe every 3 to 4 minutes, so timing is important.
We wait for their second breath, and so they come up for a second time, and that's when I usually try to get the whale blow.
40,000 humpbacks once migrated to Queensland's warm waters, but commercial fishing reduced the population to fewer than 500. Whaling ended in the early 1960s and the population has grown to half of what it once was. Dr Meynecke suspects increased numbers coupled with temperature changes and decreasing krill stocks are affecting the humpback's immune system.
But it's the same with humans. You know, you could be walking down the street and you have a really bad virus. You look healthy, but you're definitely not.
The researcher collected 11 samples during the pilot study. He'll spend the next month in a Griffith University laboratory examining whale DNA.
In those little particles that we capture, we should be able to find some pretty exciting information.
If the sampling is a success, Dr Meynecke aims to launch a larger study when the whales return to Queensland next June. Tom Forbes, ABC News, Gold Coast.
Well, as you can see, I was a little bit ahead of my time there. So,
That's what I was thinking.
Exactly. I mean, indeed, humans can have a very bad virus walking down the street and not even knowing about it. So that's why I put that little piece in there, because I was like, oh wait, that actually has something that we have at the moment. So the drone problem was that, those phantom ones were not only extremely temperamental, they sometimes just simply lost the GPS signal, and they also ran out of battery time very quickly. So I did lose a couple of drones. Those moments were horrifying, and everyone who was on the boat with me at that time is still very scared, mostly of me, because my reactions were rather, aggressive.
Probably very appropriate, but yeah.
Yes, very emotional when it came to the loss of drones. So I have a couple of amazing colleagues and support from an organization or a company called Hover, and they are now actually giving us our much more fancier and bigger drones. And it turns out that's what it needed. It just needed a bigger drone. So these drones are able to capture a lot more of the mucus, because you can simply increase your surface area. And we did actually have a good run last year, and that's sort of what it looks like. So you really have to be right above the animal, and you have to be able to time it correctly. So we had 2 drones in the air for that one. There was actually one observer drone that was telling the collector drone when the whale was going to come up, because the collector drone is so close to the surface of the water that it's very hard to see when the animal actually comes up. So that way we actually were able to get quite a good sample, or couple of samples, which I'm very excited about, because we're going to try this again. And once again, without the help of a lot of people and the passion that people have, this would not be possible. I cannot afford to pay for a drone like this, and it's already super expensive to just hire a boat to go out there. So it's been fantastic to actually share the space with other people that are not whale people, and who simply go out there because, well, they like drones, or they're really good in flying drones, and then they go out and they see a whale, and they get very excited about sharing the time with me out there and the whales, and that's really nice to see and experience, of course. So you get moments like this when you have a drone in the air, which make it all worth the risk, of course. So we ended up having a double great capturing footage. That's something that you have to fly a lot of time. It was stunning, and the drones tell us quite a bit about the behavior, of course, as well, of these animals. I mean, it's a new perspective into the ocean. You can actually often penetrate the surface of the water, and you can see what they are doing just underneath the surface. And there are so many things that, when we study them on the surface and we record all these behaviors, here's a couple of volunteers that I take out on expeditions, and that's actually what we do. We study their surface behavior, and we follow them. We generate tracks, and then I study the outcomes of that. I match up the information with sea surface temperature and of course other animals that were in the area. And with the drone, we get an insight into the water a bit more, and we can see how they interact. And we've seen some amazing rolling underwater, and they're going upside down, and they're doing pirouetting, which is, something that you just don't see when you're on the surface. And, once again, it is very important to get the head in the water if you want to know what's happening in the ocean. The passion for expeditions, I run a couple of expeditions here on the Gold Coast, but of course, there was a time when, employment wasn't very good for myself in the marine biology field. So I decided to just run expeditions. I had a fantastic family friend who owns a couple of beautiful sailing boats, and I sort of managed to run a few expeditions. One was actually in New Zealand, and just to do this video a bit quicker, not to the whole end, but it shows you what it looks like when you do a sort of self-organized expedition. No one else wanted to be on deck. It was a bit too windy and rough, and so I was getting probed into the water, and it was actually a very challenging exercise to get this probe in the water and get it back up, and do this every hour during the trip. So this one is actually a fluoro probe, which measures the density of plankton, phytoplankton, at different levels of water, and it also gives actually a composition of the phytoplankton that's in there. So whether it's some of the more common plankton strains, or whether it's something that is just broadly plankton. So the good thing about these kind of instruments is it gives us a huge insight about what's happening in certain environmental conditions, and what kind of physical, or in this case biological changes we can experience in different depths. And of course that determines what we find, what kind of animals we find in the water. So I was linking this to the presence of marine mammal sightings, mostly dolphins, and whenever there was a higher density of plankton, we would expect that there was a higher chance of dolphins being present, because they simply are having a higher chance of encountering fish that will rely on that plankton. So the ocean environment is very dynamic, and once you actually spend time out there on a boat trying to capture all these information, you realize that things are changing drastic, and they're changing more drastic than on terrestrial environments. We can see within a day, we can be in the same spot, but it looks like we're in a different ocean. And so that is something, that strikes me a lot, and obviously makes researching this environment even more challenging, because it does change so quickly. And all the instruments need to be waterproof, they need to be salt-proofed, and the constant fight against corrosion is something that you basically do on an hourly basis. I mean, the amount of times you have to clean and rinse your equipment and spray it and make sure that all the connections are working and the O-rings are fine. I mean, you guys know this. It's a whole task for itself just to keep your instruments alive. So yeah, I ended up doing a few of these kind of expeditions, one in New Zealand, one in Thailand, one along the east coast of Australia, and hoping to do actually another one in the Mediterranean next year, if time allows and if we have the ability to move again. And usually at this time of year, I would actually be starting to run an expedition in the Great Barrier Reef on minke whales, which is something that my whale passion obviously led me to, and I really enjoy those trips. They're run with a tourism operator for youth travel, and I really enjoy just being out there with young people and teaching them about these amazing animals, and also at the same time collect some data for another project at JCU. So unfortunately, there won't be an expedition this year to the minke whales, which I will miss a lot, because it has been over the last couple of years the highlight of the year for me, just being out there and spending time with these animals in the water. It's a very well managed sort of interaction as well. People are on a line, they're not allowed to leave the line. The animals fully choose to interact with people, and that's something very special when you realize there's this big, massive, beautiful animal coming towards you, and it takes sometimes an hour or so until they really come within a meter, and then they do check you out and they'll look at you. And it's just, I mean, everyone who has that experience, you know, either freaks out with a lot of screaming, which usually is happening, so you can hear the screams when you're on the boat from the people that are on the line in the water. Then you know the whale is coming close. And we're getting towards the end of my presentation, but this is one of the sort of latest challenges that I have put myself into, is trying to tag whales with suction cup tags to get some more information about their short-term movements. And I really want to do this here on the Gold Coast, and that's the challenge, because we are in a sort of mostly migratory corridor. So a lot of the animals are on a mission to go somewhere, and they're not just hanging around, and the water isn't always calm. In fact, if we're lucky, we get maybe 2 days per week where the conditions are super calm like that. And I need very calm conditions to allow me to get those tags on. And so we had a first trial last year, and it sort of seems to work, but we didn't really have enough sea time. So this year, I'm just preparing for the season. Hopefully we are able to go out in June. So I'll be very excited to get some of those tags working, and more information about, in particular, the mothers and calves that come into the bay that I mentioned earlier, who sometimes get stuck in those terrible shark nets. So learning more about those mothers and calves and how they use the area for resting is something that those tags can tell us. And of course, we have the luxury of adding a video function to it. We'll do this year as well, just to capture some of those interactions between mothers and calves. And there have been some amazing footage coming out of Hawaii from a colleague who recently actually went there, and that was a mission that just ended because their breeding season is over now in Hawaii, and they got a calf feeding on the female, on the mother. And it's just something that, you have to have a lot of luck to get that. And when I was visiting their lab earlier this year, I was in the US in Monterey, and they showed me some of the footage that they got from those suction cup tags. There was footage from killer whales in the Antarctic, and it was actually facing backward, and you could see this whole family of killer whales just like following, and the interaction between them, that they were touching each other, purposely having a physical interaction, continuously making sure that, oh yeah, this is, you're still here. And that's something, you just only get when you have your eyes underwater. In this case, you've got the camera underwater and attached to an animal. So now we are very busy at the moment working on this new project that we've just started, and it sort of is, everything that I've done and that I told you in the past now is something that led to this big project where we're looking at climate change impacts in the Southern Hemisphere on humpback whales. And this project involves 5 different universities on 3 different continents. And it's been an interesting challenge, but I'm absolutely grateful that we have received the funding to do this project. And it is more timely than ever. While no one seems to talk about climate change at the moment, but our whales are definitely going to meet a very different environment. We've seen some of the fastest sea ice retreats in the last 5 years in the Antarctic waters ever recorded. And that fast sea ice retreat has tremendous impacts on the food supply for the humpback whale. So we'll have to see how this is changing the dynamics of the population, and this is what we're actually doing in this large scale research program. And this is my last slide now. So I hope I could take you a bit on a journey, and basically my journey into the marine environment, how I actually ended up falling in love with the ocean.
There's a bit of echo down there.
There's a lot of echo on your end.
Someone is can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Question is, in 2010, when we did the Elysium expeditions, the first 4 or 5 stations around in peninsula, when samples of plankton, instead of getting krill, we're getting a lot of sea salt. Do you think this affects the nutritional value for whales as well?
Yes, I think it does. I'm just trying to see if I get out of the screen sharing. Yeah.
Michael, you know how you've got two windows up top?
But both is muted. One is muted.
No, the other one is not. I don't think. Now it is. Try it now.
Now it is. Okay, yes.
No, my mic is muted.
No. All right. Well, I don't know.
Okay. So your question was about the nutrients in the Southern Ocean or in the Antarctic?
In the Antarctic, yeah, because you're getting more salt instead of krills. How does it affect the nutrition value for whales?
Well, so one of the things that we know not that much about, where exactly the whales are feeding. We do know that they prefer different krill size, which means different age classes of krill. So there's actually a couple of interesting studies that looked at how different whale species, baleen whales, are sharing, the same, obviously sharing krill, the same food source, but they're actually feeding on different age classes. And I think, and that's where it becomes quite interesting because the age class depends on your success of nutrient release from the sea. So the sea ice contains, elements like iron. And so some of those trace elements are extremely important for the bloom of the plankton. So if the phytoplankton doesn't get these trace elements, then it won't bloom, even though there's nutrients in the water, but the trace elements are the key. But if this release of trace elements happens very quickly, say over a couple of days or maybe, 1 or 2 weeks, and then it's gone because the sea ice is already melted, well, you get a bloom for that short time frame. But the krill that will be feeding on that will only have a very short time to feed. So, it ultimately will then impact on the population of the krill because they will only have a short time to feed. So they might not reproduce as much, or, you will find that there is just simply, gaps in the different age classes. And that's when, the struggle starts for the whales, because if they start looking for that particular age class of krill and they can't find it, well, they're going to start moving to something else. Of course, they're flexible and they're doing that. We already know, we know for some strange reason, for the first time, we recorded now supergroups in South Africa in March and even in April. So these animals just feed on copepods and they stay there in South Africa and they didn't go down to Antarctica. So, there's adaptation happening. So maybe it is already happening and we just haven't got the proof for it yet. So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, I suppose.
Okay. Do you know anything about the juveniles, or rather teenager hangout of boys coming together, especially those when we go to Tromsø, we only get the boys down there. You know anything of those? Why they just hang together? Just a teenager.
So are you talking about the sub-adult humpback whale?
Exactly, they're all boys in Tromsø.
Yeah. Yes. So there is a very distinct segregation or division between age classes. So the humpback whales will not just hang out with everyone. The sub-adults will usually travel together, and they obviously, there is some socializing with the adults, of course, but there is distinct sort of migration patterns. And it seems, that those females who are going to be pregnant or who are pregnant, they are more likely to be together, and they are in that sort of, they move around in the same area, they spend, more time together. And then they also will appear in the breeding grounds at similar times, which perfectly makes sense. They, if they would all end up mixing, it's not necessarily what, would be very beneficial for the population. And it's also mostly driven by the food supply. So the pregnant females need to spend the longest possible time in Antarctica and get the most amount of food as possible. Whereas the subadult, there is some that actually do not even go to Antarctica, and they will be able to feed on fish and sustain on that without having to gain that much fat. Whereas the pregnant females will have to make sure they have, a huge amount of fat resources. Otherwise, they won't simply make it. And I think that's where that sort of division starts. And that's why the subadults actually have more time to hang out and socialize anyway, because they don't have to spend all this time feeding.
Okay. Alex, can you check for any questions out there?
I did check. I haven't seen anything yet. I'm curious though, how long do those suction cup tags stay on? I mean, I'm sure it ranges, but
yes, I mean that's a very good question, because obviously, well, generally you want them to stay on as long as possible. It depends on the environment. So I hear from colleagues that have been doing that tagging, same tags in Antarctic waters. It has been more successful. They stay longer because they don't shed their skin that much. Whereas in warmer waters, they tend to shed the skin. The skin has a different condition, and suctions don't stay on for days. I mean, in the Antarctic, there have been tags that stayed on for days. Like we're talking about, 4 or 5 days, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Here in those breeding areas and warmer waters, probably if we're lucky, we get 10, 12 hours out of it. We want to extend it. We want to find ways to actually make them stay on for a couple of days. But you also don't want them too long, because otherwise you'll never find your tag again.
No. Yeah, that was sort of the follow-up question, is how hard are these to find, and do you lose them often?
Yeah, so they all have a VHF transmitter, and you can actually search for them within a 10-kilometer range. Of course, if it's wavy, if the buoyancy is a bit wrong, if they tend to go flat on the surface, very bad.
Mm-hmm.
That, you might lose your tag. You can just write your phone number on it, and hopefully someone's going to call you one day.
Hopefully.
It's always an option, I guess.
Yeah. Tell us, coming with us to the Antarctic in 2022, hopefully we get there. What do you hope to achieve during that expeditions?
Yeah, so that expedition fits perfectly into our large-scale humpback whale climate change research program, simply because it actually goes into the population G, which is a humpback whale population that sort of feeds in that West Antarctic peninsula. And we're hoping to match some of the sightings that we get with a big fluke catalog that the South American partners have already established over 10, 15 years of intensive research in the area. So there's a wonderful knowledge already from that area. And of course, it's the area that's hit probably the hardest in terms of climate change. It's been warming dramatically over the last couple of years. And we are seeing changes. Like there's already been actually papers out there that show how they're extending their time in Ecuador in the breeding grounds, and they spending less time in the feeding ground. Well, there can only be one logical reason for that, is because it's no point spending time in the feeding ground because there is no food. So we do see a shift there, and I'm hoping, of course, that if we get all our permits right, to get drone footage as well, looking at the size ranges of animals, and that's talking about the fat, basically, like how large are they, and looking at different stages of that size. And of course, we've been collecting whale flakes, and I know the colleagues in South America have been doing this too. So getting any kind of DNA samples from the animals, I mean, getting skin from the surface of the water is usually an easier exercise than getting biopsy samples, which is a possibility. The colleagues have been asking for biopsy samples. So, and whale poo would be fantastic. We are very, very much in need of whale poo. So any poo we can get, we're relying on the super groups in South Africa for this season, and hopefully that will get us some whale feces, but if we can get something from there, that would be extremely helpful for our group in South Africa. The biogeochemists, they would love some whale poo.
Wow.
Well, Michael, now you know what we have to work on. That's what we have to do now.
That's what we'll be bringing back.
Yeah, we've got our work cut out for us. Whale snot and whale poo. It's going to be great.
That's what I like to hear.
Well, Olaf, aka Dr. Whale, thank you so much for this. Having you with us, we learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And hopefully you have the Eco Summit running next year.
Yes, exactly. So Eco Summit is on the 14th to 18th of June. That's the plan. A really big international scientific conference on sustainability and with a strong focus on the coastal and marine environment. So and I hope, Michael, that you'll be able to join us then, because we would love to have you there as planned, and of course with Sylvia too. So. Let's hope for that. And yeah, thanks again. Thanks for having me on here, and thanks for organizing these amazing webinars. And I think that's fantastic. You really are pushing for some amazing webinars that are still to come. So I can't wait to tune in again.
It's a resource that we can use. We can put out there a good reference point, for everybody to share, and it's a good learning experience. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.